This is it, the ultimate dimension for rest and stories, and it's called Sleepy Myths.
It began, as most Rick inventions do, with boredom and too much brilliance for one lifetime. Morty, you ever think the universe is just one big setup waiting for the punchline? Rick muttered, slouched over his workbench, a cigarette flickering like a dying star. Morty looked up from the couch, eyes bleary from cartoons.
I don't know, Rick. Isn't everything kind of a punchline with you?
Rick smirked, that crooked cosmic smirk that suggested he already knew the answer. Not good enough. We're making it funnier. The device didn't look like much. A silver orb, no bigger than a grapefruit, humming softly with faint pink light. Rick called it the Laugh-O-Matic, though later he'd rename it about 14 times before destroying it completely. At first, it was just supposed to make people laugh. Then it made everything funny. He flipped a switch, Morty giggled. Then he laughed harder, harder still, until the laugh turned into a wheeze, then a hiccup, then a helpless collapse onto the floor. Rick!
I can't stop.
Rick chuckled, arms crossed. That's the point, Morty, that's the joke. It's the funniest thing you'll ever experience. Within seconds, the entire garage shimmered, reality bending in on itself like a sitcom set. The walls pulsed with a faint studio audience laughter track. The air itself seemed to giggle. Even the tools on Rick's bench started vibrating with mirth. Somewhere outside, a bird chirped, but the sound warped into a chuckle. The neighbor's dog barked, then snorted. Morty's phone buzzed with a text notification that read simply, LOL, and for a moment it was wonderful. Every awkward silence turned into a shared laugh. Every mistake was met with amusement instead of anger. Even Rick, for all his cynicism, felt lighter, like the universe had finally gotten the punchline it had been waiting billions of years for. They went to the kitchen. Beth was mid-argument with Jerry. Then as soon as she opened her mouth, laughter. Jerry tried to protest. No more laughter. Summer walked in, confused, and joined them, tears streaming down her face, unable to stop laughing. Within hours, the laughter had spread beyond the house. Across the street, the Smiths' neighbors were rolling on the grass, clutching their bellies. Across town, traffic jams dissolved into symphonies of giggles. The news anchor on TV was laughing so hard she couldn't finish her sentence. The president appeared live, chuckling uncontrollably during a speech about climate change, and the stars began to shimmer differently that night. It was as if the entire cosmos had joined in on the joke. Morty lay in bed, still trembling with laughter that wouldn't quit.
His chest hurt.
His face ached. His eyes watered endlessly. Somewhere between exhaustion and hysteria, he whispered, "Rick."
Make it stop, please.
But Rick, sitting at his desk, was still smiling faintly, staring into the silver orb as if it held every answer he'd ever chased. It's beautiful, Morty. Don't you see? No pain, no sorrow, no guilt, just endless joy. The purest frequency in existence, Morty laughed weakly through tears. But it hurts, Rick.
It's not even funny anymore.
Rick looked at him, the faint glow of the device painting soft lines across his tired face. For the first time, his smile faltered. The next morning, the world felt wrong. People weren't speaking anymore. They didn't need to. Every expression, joy, fear, confusion, was met with the same reflexive laughter. Doctors laughed through surgeries. Teachers giggled through lessons they no longer understood. Funeral homes were filled with audiences roaring with delight. Rick and Morty stood atop the hill outside their house, looking down at a world unrecognizable. The wind carried the sound of millions of people laughing at once, not cruelly, not happily, just endlessly. Morty turned to Rick. It's like everyone's. Broken? Rick said nothing. The silver orb hovered beside him, faintly pulsing like a heartbeat. Every time it glowed, another wave of laughter rippled through the air. an invisible contagion of mirth. Rick adjusted his collar, forcing nonchalance. Well, humor's subjective, Morty. Guess the universe finally found something it can agree on. But there was a heaviness behind his words, a faint, invisible gravity pulling the corners of his mouth downward. That night, Morty couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, laughter echoed from somewhere, far away, yet everywhere. The moon looked like it was smirking. The stars twinkled too rhythmically, like a laugh track synced to the beat of infinity. He turned in his bed and saw Rick standing by the window, looking out, silent. The glow of the orb cast pale reflections on the glass, twin halos over his shoulders. "Rick," Morty said softly, "you think maybe—"
Too much laughter isn't good.
Rick didn't answer right away. His reflection blinked, tired, human. "Morty," he murmured, "you ever notice how people laugh the hardest when they're about to cry?" Morty frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Rick finally looked back. "It means even the universe gets nervous sometimes." Outside, a gentle ripple passed through the night, the faintest hum of laughter blending with the sound of wind, of life, of cosmic rhythm. For a moment it almost felt peaceful again, but deep down, Morty knew something was off. The laughter didn't feel like warmth anymore. It felt like static, a loop that couldn't end. Rick lifted the silver orb one last time, studying it under the moonlight. "Well," he muttered, "either I've created the funniest universe imaginable—"
Or the loneliest one. He placed it gently on the desk. The glow dimmed.
The sound faded just slightly, enough for Morty to breathe again. Outside, the stars blinked like they were trying to remember what silence felt like. And as Morty finally drifted into a fitful sleep, somewhere in the cosmos, the laughter continued, faint, endless, echoing through galaxies that didn't even know what humor was. It was the joke that never ended, and Rick wasn't laughing anymore. By the time Rick and Morty left Earth, the sound of laughter had become the universe's new background radiation. Everywhere they went, echoes of amusement followed, from orbiting satellites that beeped in chuckles, to planets whose surfaces shimmered with mirthful light. Even the warp drive of Rick's ship seemed to giggle faintly each time they entered hyperspace. Morty pressed his hands over his ears.
"Rick, this is creepy, man. Everything's laughing, even the engine."
Rick adjusted a dial on the console, unbothered. That's because the Laugh-O-Matic's humor frequency integrated into the cosmic background.
It's like dark energy now, invisible, unstoppable, and... or really into slapstick? Morty frowned, watching stars streak past the window. So it's everywhere? Like forever?
Rick sipped from his flask. "Unless we find the quiet planet. Rumor says it's the only place left where laughter hasn't reached." Morty sighed, slumping into his seat.
"Can't we just, turn it off?"
Rick's eyes flickered toward the small metal sphere sitting in the cup holder, the device now pulsing faintly with every joke in existence.
"Can't turn off entropy, Morty. Once a joke's told, it lives forever."
All we can do is find where it stops being funny." For a long moment, they drifted in silence. Or rather, in the closest thing to silence the universe could offer now, faint giggles rippling through space like radio waves. Then their ship entered the orbit of a planet shaped like a giant smile. The continents curved upward. The clouds seemed arranged in laughing faces. Its atmosphere shimmered with golden haze like a world built entirely from punchlines. Morty stared in disbelief.
"Rick, that can't be real." "Oh, it's real," Rick said.
"Welcome to Planet Ha-Ha, population, too many comedians." The moment they landed, the laughter hit them like warm air. People in bright, cartoonish outfits filled the streets, laughing, performing, applauding nothing. Even the trees had faces. Wooden mouths open in permanent grins, a holographic billboard above them read, "Humor is law, sadness is treason." Morty gulped.
That's not funny, Rick. That's like...
Dystopian clown world. Dystopian? Rick scoffed. Please. This is just Twitter with better lighting. They wandered through the crowd. Every time Rick frowned or Morty hesitated, nearby citizens gasped, then forced laughter until they cried. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic, wrong. A man in a colorful uniform approached them, holding a glowing baton. His smile was too wide, too fixed. "Welcome, travelers. Please register your approved laugh pattern." "Our what?" Morty asked. The officer's grin didn't move. "All guests must provide 3 authorized chuckles and 1 socially acceptable snort." Rick rolled his eyes.
Oh, for crying out loud, the crowd gasped, horrified at his tone.
The officer's smile flickered. "So crying is prohibited. Would you like to file a complaint through the joke department?" Rick smirked. "Yeah, sure. Got any complaint forms for reality itself?" Instantly, 1,000 holographic balloons erupted into the air, each one repeating his words in mocking laughter.
Reality itself. Reality itself.
Morty clutched his head.
Rick, this place is nuts.
"We gotta leave." But Rick's eyes were scanning the skyline, the laughter patterns, the holographic frequencies, the cadence of how the air itself vibrated. His genius brain was working through it like a broken equation. "Morty, this isn't comedy," he murmured. "It's control. The laughter isn't joy, it's surveillance." Morty blinked. "Surveillance?" Rick pointed at the floating smile-shaped drones above them. "Those aren't lights. They're emotional scanners. They're tracking reactions, making sure everyone keeps laughing. Whoever built this world isn't trying to make people happy. They're trying to keep them from feeling." The laughter around them grew louder, like the planet itself was reacting to his words. The officer's face twitched, glitching between a grin and a grimace. "Non-compliant humor detected," it said, in a cheerful tone. Rick grabbed Morty's wrist.
Run! They sprinted through the glowing streets as laughter chased them like sirens.
Everywhere they turned, giant holograms of smiling faces appeared in the sky, chanting, "Laugh!
Laugh! Laugh!"
They reached the edge of the city, diving behind a mural shaped like a stand-up microphone. Morty's chest heaved.
Rick, what the hell happened to these people?
Rick caught his breath, staring out at the landscape, an entire civilization addicted to amusement. They forgot that laughter's supposed to end.
Morty. That's what gives it meaning. He looked distant now, eyes shadowed with something close to guilt. Back in the ship.
As they lifted off, Morty glanced down at the glowing world. From orbit, it looked beautiful, all gold and joy shining like a beacon. But beneath that light was exhaustion, the kind that came from never stopping to breathe. "Rick," he whispered, "do you think we did this?" Rick didn't answer. He just stared at the device again, the soft pulse matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Maybe," he said finally. "Maybe we just gave the universe what it always wanted, something to laugh about so it wouldn't have to think about itself." They drifted in quiet for a while, watching the planet shrink into a golden dot behind them. The stars shimmered ahead, still laughing softly, faintly, eternally. Morty sighed. "You ever wonder if maybe people laugh because they're scared, Rick?" Rick smiled faintly, but his eyes were tired. "That's the only reason they laugh, Morty." Outside, another ripple of laughter passed through the void. This one faint, distant, almost fragile. For the first time since the joke began, it didn't sound funny at all. The echoes faded, leaving only the hum of the ship, and the faint ache of 2 travelers floating through a universe that couldn't stop laughing. Rick leaned back, closing his eyes. "All right, kid. Next stop, the quiet planet. Let's see if silence still remembers us." The ship vanished into a beam of light. swallowed by the stars. And behind them, the echoes of laughter rolled on like waves on a cosmic shore. The stars had started laughing. Not loudly, not like people or machines, but softly, like distant bells ringing underwater. Every time a sun flared, it let out a faint, amused sigh. Every black hole shimmered as though smirking at its own gravity. It wasn't chaos anymore.
It was rhythm.
Cosmic, delicate, endless. Rick stared out the viewport of the ship, watching a nebula curl into a crooked grin. He squinted. It's like the whole damn universe became a comedy club. Morty floated beside him, wrapped in a blanket he'd found in the back compartment. He hadn't slept for days.
That's kind of pretty though, right? I mean, creepy, but...
Pretty, Rick's reflection flickered against the glass. 2 tired eyes, 1 faint smile. Yeah, beautiful things tend to be dangerous, Morty. Ask anyone who's ever laughed too hard. The ship hummed through starlight. Everywhere they went, they could feel it. That strange undercurrent of forced joy. Even radio static carried faint chuckles. The navigation system snickered when Morty pressed buttons. Rick adjusted coordinates manually, muttering under his breath. All right, we're heading toward the quiet sector. According to legend, there's a system there where sound itself got bored and stopped existing. Morty tilted his head.
Sound stopped existing?
Yeah, Rick replied, like a cosmic burnout. The universe got tired of listening to its own noise and hit mute. If anywhere still remembers what peace sounds like, it's there. Morty didn't answer. He just watched the stars glide past, each one twinkling like a knowing eye. There was something eerie about it, like being laughed at by ghosts. After hours of quiet travel, the laughter outside began to fade. The ship entered a dim violet corridor of space. No radio waves, no signals, no chatter. Just emptiness, Morty shivered. It's
quiet, Rick exhaled almost reverently.
Yeah, quiet's underrated. But then, out of the silence, came a sound, not laughter, but a gentle hum.
Like the universe clearing its throat. Ahead of them, a planet came into view, small, blue-grey, glowing faintly from within. Rick smirked.
Bingo, quiet planet? As they descended through the thin atmosphere, the ship's systems flickered, unsure how to process a world without sound. Even the landing thrusters hissed silently. The ground below was smooth, crystalline, reflecting dim light like frozen breath. Morty stepped outside first.
His boots made no sound.
He gasped, but no voice came out. Even shock was muted here. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, like standing in warm fog. Rick followed, adjusting his portal gun. Sound dampening field. Probably the planet's natural defense. Don't panic, Morty. We can still communicate. He held up a wrist device projecting glowing text as he typed. Rick, don't freak out. Just nod if you're good. Morty nodded slowly. His heartbeat was the loudest thing he could feel. For the first time in forever, no laughter followed him.
No echoes, no jokes.
Just stillness. They began exploring the crystal plains. The landscape shimmered with frozen echoes, transparent sculptures that seemed shaped by long-forgotten sound waves. Frozen laughter, frozen sighs, frozen songs. Morty ran his hand along one. It vibrated faintly, like it remembered joy. He looked at Rick, eyes soft. It's peaceful. Rick smiled without sound, typing again. Rick. Peaceful's nice until you realize what it costs. Morty frowned, confused. Rick didn't elaborate. He just kept walking toward the horizon where the sky bled into a violet haze. There, among the quiet mountains, they found something strange. A structure shaped like a tuning fork, half buried in glassy dust. Its surface pulsed faintly with light, like a heartbeat waiting to restart. Rick knelt beside it, scanning it with his wristband. Rick, looks like a resonance engine. It could have absorbed the planet's sound, Morty typed back, clumsy with the keyboard. Morty, why would anyone want to get rid of sound? Rick looked at him, then at the vast, frozen world. His expression softened. Rick, maybe they got tired of hearing themselves laugh. For a while, they stood in that stillness, just two figures in a muted dream. Morty's eyes shimmered with reflections of distant light. He wanted to say something, but even in silence, words felt heavy. Finally, Rick lifted his flask, tilted it toward the sky, not in toast, but in quiet acknowledgement. Then, with a few adjustments, he began tinkering with the resonance engine. The air shimmered faintly as though remembering how to vibrate. A single sound escaped. Soft, trembling, pure. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't speech. It was like the first note of a song the universe had forgotten. Morty's eyes widened.
Rick, did you hear that?
Rick grinned faintly. Yeah, the planet just exhaled. The sound faded almost instantly, swallowed by the silence again. But something had changed. The laughter that haunted the stars no longer echoed here. The quiet planet was still quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt alive. Morty sat down on a smooth rock, smiling softly. You know, Rick, maybe the universe just needed a break. Rick nodded, looking at the horizon. Yeah, Morty? Everything laughs too long eventually. He pocketed the resonance tool, then glanced at the small humor device glowing in his coat pocket. The once vibrant pulse had dimmed to a calm blue. As they walked back to the ship, Morty noticed something new. A faint shimmer across the stars, like the cosmos was smiling softly this time. Not loud.
Not forced, just
Gentle. When they lifted off, the engines barely whispered. The world below faded into twilight. Rick leaned back in his chair. You know, Morty, the universe smiling too much isn't the problem.
It's when it forgets why it started smiling in the first place. Morty turned to him.
Why did it then? Rick looked out the window, voice low. Because once, a lonely universe realized it could laugh, and it mistook that for being alive. The ship entered warp. The stars stretched, glowing faintly. Each one a reminder that even laughter,
If endless can become silence, and somewhere,
behind all the noise and quiet, the universe held its breath, waiting to see what kind of smile would come next. The laughter was fading now, like the tail end of an echo that had forgotten what started. Rick and Morty drifted through a tunnel of soft starlight, their ship gliding through a haze of blue dust that shimmered faintly, like the universe was trying to remember how to breathe again. Outside, galaxies spun in slow motion, painted in shades of melancholy gold. Every few seconds a faint chuckle rippled through the ether. But it wasn't loud anymore. It was tired. Morty leaned his forehead against the cold glass, staring out into the endless swirl. Feels weird, Rick, like the whole universe has got a hangover or something. Rick didn't look up from the console. Yeah, well, when you overdose on laughter, the come-down's quiet. Morty smiled faintly. Didn't think laughter could hurt this much, Rick grunted. Everything's a drug if you take too much of it, Morty, even happiness. The ship coasted silently between clusters of flickering stars. Each one blinked like a dying candle. The navigation system showed one destination pulsing faintly, the quiet planet, the last known refuge untouched by the humor wave. It wasn't marked on any official map.
it existed somewhere between myth and mercy. Rick adjusted the controls manually.
Autopilot can't find it. You gotta listen for it instead. Listen.
Like, with our ears?
Morty tilted his head. Rick smirked.
No, genius.
With the parts of you that haven't given up yet. Morty didn't get it, but he didn't press. He closed his eyes and listened. There was no sound, just the hum of the ship, the faint buzz of machinery, and somewhere deep inside, a pulse that didn't belong to him. It felt like the galaxy's heartbeat, slow, patient, waiting. The ship glided forward as if guided by that pulse. Rick sat back, flask in hand, watching his grandson drift into the rhythm of something beyond control. "You're getting better at this, Morty," he muttered softly. "At hearing what the universe doesn't say," Morty opened his eyes.
What's that supposed to mean?
Rick shrugged.
Means you're growing up, kid.
"Don't ruin it by talking about it." They both laughed quietly, tweeted the first real laugh in days. It wasn't forced. It wasn't cosmic. It was small and human. Hours passed like dreams. The deeper they traveled, the darker space became. No stars, no signals. Just velvety blackness pierced by faint silver line. The ghost trails of forgotten comets. The only light came from the ship's cabin, glowing like a campfire in an infinite night. Morty rubbed his arms. "It's colder here," Rick nodded. "That's how you know you're close. The quiet planet doesn't like noise, not even from photons." Then through the void, a soft shimmer appeared. At first, it looked like nothing, a ripple in nothingness. But then it unfolded like a curtain of glass. A planet emerged, suspended in stillness. It didn't spin. It didn't shine. It simply was, Rick whispered. "There it is." They descended through the upper atmosphere. Clouds moved so slowly they looked painted on. The ship landed on a surface of silvery stone, smooth and dimly reflective, like the memory of water. When they stepped outside, there was no sound, not even the crunch of their boots. Every movement felt like walking through a dream that was afraid to wake up. Morty turned to Rick and mouthed something. Rick held up a device and text appeared on his visor. "No talking." The air-eat sound. Morty frowned but nodded. They began walking toward a soft blue glow on the horizon. Along the way they passed shapes. Small mounds of crystal, tall spires like frozen waves. Each one shimmered faintly, pulsing in rhythm. Morty touched one and gasped silently. The structure lit up, projecting a faint memory, a child laughing, a ripple of warmth, and then nothing. It was as if every echo of joy that had ever existed here had been turned into light and left behind. Rick watched with quiet awe. "Echo fossils," he typed. "Remnants of sound," Morty smiled sadly, mouthing, "They're beautiful." They reached the source of the blue glow, a massive sphere hovering above a valley of glass. Inside the sphere, faint silhouettes shimmered. People, maybe, or memories pretending to be people. Rick activated his scanner. The screen displayed one word, harmony. He frowned. "Figures," Morty typed on his wrist device.
Harmony? Like music?
Rick shook his head. "Like silence that remembers what music used to feel like." They stood together, bathed in the sphere's soft light. For a moment, Morty thought he heard something. Not sound exactly, but vibration. The faint suggestion of a lullaby or maybe laughter turned into mercy. It moved through him like a sigh. Rick looked down at the old humor device clipped to his belt. Its once golden core was now dim and cool. For the first time, it wasn't humming. He unclipped it, held it up to the sphere, and whispered into the silence. "It's okay. You can rest now." The device flickered once, then dissolved into tiny particles of light, merging with the quiet blue glow. Morty felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, to joke, to fill the air. But he didn't. He just looked at his grandpa and nodded. Rick met his gaze and smiled. Small, real, unguarded. The kind of smile that had nothing to prove. They stayed there for a long time, not talking, not laughing, just breathing the same soundless air. The quiet planet held them gently, like an old friend. Eventually, Rick turned toward the ship. He typed one last message on his visor. "Let's go before we start to like it too much," Morty smiled, following behind. As they lifted off, the planet shimmered once more, a faint ripple of color moving across its surface, like a heartbeat under glass. In orbit, Morty looked back. "So that's it?"
We just leave?
Rick adjusted the ship's course. Yeah, quiet doesn't need witnesses, Morty. It just needs to exist. The stars around them seemed softer now. The laughter that once filled the galaxy had faded to a whisper. Not gone, just balanced. As they drifted away, the quiet planet shrank into a speck of light, then vanished entirely, as if it had never been there at all. Morty leaned back, closing his eyes. Hey, Rick, do you think silence ever gets lonely? Rick looked out at the endless dark. Nah, it just waits for someone to listen. And for the first time since the universe began laughing, both of them felt calm. The quiet planet disappeared behind them. Not with a flash, not with a sound, just a soft fade into the kind of nothing that feels sacred. For a long while, neither Rick nor Morty said a word. The silence they'd carried from that place lingered in their bones like a new kind of gravity. Then the ship began to hum again. Lights flickered back to life on the console. The engines whispered softly. Space felt awake once more. Morty broke the silence first.
So, where to now?
Rick leaned back, adjusting the trajectory on the holo map. Next stop's Laughless Town. Coordinates say it's the last inhabited settlement in this sector.
Used to be the comedy capital of the cosmos, Morty frowned.
And now? Rick sighed. Now it's just a punchline without a setup. The ship descended through a pale green atmosphere, landing in the middle of a quiet, dust-covered town. The buildings looked cartoonishly cheerful. Bright colors faded by time, signs shaped like smiling faces drooping in the sun. A huge, cracked billboard greeted them. Welcome to Laughless, where the jokes never die, they just stop being funny. Morty stepped out first. The air smelled faintly of burnt sugar and rust. Wind drifted down the empty streets, carrying scraps of old confetti that fluttered like ghosts of celebration. Rick, Morty whispered, where is everyone? Rick adjusted his scanner.
They're here, just
quieter than usual. They turned a corner and found them. Townsfolk standing in small groups, faces calm, eyes hollow. Some smiled faintly as if out of habit. Others just stared into the distance, lips frozen mid-laugh, like statues who'd forgotten what movement felt like. Morty swallowed. What happened to them? Rick tapped the device on his wrist. Residual laughter saturation. When the humor wave hit, this place got more of it than anywhere else. They laughed for days, couldn't stop. Then their brains adapted, numbed out the emotional receptors. Now they can't laugh or cry.
They just exist. A woman approached them slowly.
Her eyes were bright but empty, her smile too still. Visitors? She asked softly. We don't get visitors anymore. Not since the quiet stopped coming. Rick raised an eyebrow. The quiet? She nodded. A man used to come through here.
Said he was looking for silence.
Said it was the only real joke left. We laughed. We couldn't help it. Her expression flickered, the faintest twitch of sorrow. Then we never laughed again. Morty glanced at Rick. You think she's talking about... Rick cut him off.
Evil Morty, yeah, he's been here. The woman tilted her head. You know him?
Rick smirked. Let's just say we've shared a few punchlines. She blinked slowly, as if trying to process humor that no longer worked.
He said he was going to rewrite the ending. Rewrite the what?
Morty asked, but she didn't answer. She turned and walked away, her laughter echoing faintly. A hollow, mechanical sound that didn't belong to joy anymore. They explored the town. Every corner felt like a parody of happiness. Fountains shaped like clowns, murals painted with smiles, broken lights that flickered, ha-ha, in dull repetition. Morty kicked a tin can. This is creepy, Rick. It's like the whole place forgot what fun means. Rick stopped in front of a small stage in the town square. The faded banner above it read, Comedy is forever. Dust covered the microphones, and old posters clung to the walls like dried memories. Rick climbed the stage. You know, Morty, comedy is forever, just not in the way people think.
Every joke's a way to cope.
a way to make meaning out of pain. But if you take away the pain, the joke dies too, Morty frowned. So that's it? These people can't feel pain or joy? Yeah, they cured themselves without knowing it. That's the cosmic punchline. Then unexpectedly, one of the lights flickered brighter. A hologram came to life, a projection of evil Morty standing on the stage like a ghost from another timeline. His voice was calm, deliberate. If you're seeing this, you followed the trail. Good. You always do, Rick. Rick froze. Morty stared at the hologram. The universe doesn't need laughter anymore, evil Morty continued.
It needs quiet.
I've found a way to reset the emotional spectrum, to free every consciousness from the loop of humor and despair. When I'm done, no one will suffer, because no one will feel. Morty's stomach turned.
He's going to erase emotions.
Rick clenched his fists. Yeah, the bastard's trying to sterilize reality. The hologram glitched, flickering between frames of evil Morty's golden eye and a swirling data stream. Don't follow me.
Rick, you won't understand until it's too late.
Laughter was the first lie the multiverse ever told.
I'm just cleaning up the joke. The image vanished. For a long moment, there was only the hum of broken neon. Morty finally whispered, Rick. He sounds serious. Rick didn't answer.
He stared at the empty stage, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Then he finally said, He's not wrong, Morty. He's just trying to win the wrong argument. Morty frowned. What argument? Rick sighed. The one between feeling and forgetting, between being alive and being safe. They left the stage and walked down the empty street. The townspeople turned slowly as they passed, each face trying, failing to smile. Morty looked back one last time. We can't leave them like this. Rick hesitated, then pulled a small device from his coat, a cracked amplifier tuned to emotional frequency.
I can't fix them, Morty, but I can remind them. He pressed a button.
A low hum spread through the air, vibrating through the dust and silence. The confetti on the ground began to rise, swirling gently.
And then, faintly, well, one person laughed.
It was small, fragile, but real. Then another joined.
And another.
The laughter was weak, uneven, but it grew. Not the manic hysteria from before, but something soft and human. Rick watched quietly, a shadow of pride crossing his face.
See, Morty?
The universe doesn't forget laughter. It just waits for the right reason. They boarded the ship again, the sound of that gentle laughter fading behind them. As they ascended into the sky, Morty asked, So where to now? Rick's eyes narrowed. Wherever evil Morty went next. If he wants to erase feelings, we're going to give him something he can't delete. Morty looked out the window as the town disappeared beneath the clouds.
Hope? Rick smirked. Ah, sarcasm. It's harder to kill. And somewhere,
deep in the stars, a faint ripple of laughter. Not from joy, but from defiance, echoed through the void. The stars stretched like old memories. Dim, flickering, half awake, the ship glided through them quietly, as if afraid to disturb the silence they had just left behind. Morty leaned against the window, his reflection pale in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Rick sat slouched in the pilot's chair, fingers tapping absently on the console. They didn't speak for a long while. The laughter of Laughless Town still echoed faintly in their minds. Not loud, not bright, just lingering, like a sound that wanted to stay. Morty finally broke the stillness. Rick, do you think they'll be okay? Rick shrugged. They remembered how to feel. That's more than most universes can manage. That's enough. The ship's radar blinked softly, signaling a faint energy trail, the same emotional signature left by evil Morty's hologram. Rick zoomed in. It led to a small planet orbiting a dying red sun. Destination locked, Rick muttered. Funny, huh? He's hiding in a place that looks like a bad joke. Red light, empty world, long shadows. Subtle as ever, Morty watched as they descended. The planet below looked like an old painting, cracked deserts, wind-blown valleys, and one lonely settlement built around the skeleton of an amusement park. Faded signs read, "Smile Land, where happiness never ends." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They landed near the park's main gate. Rusted rides stood still under the blood-red sky. A carousel creaked softly, turning once every few minutes as if haunted by muscle memory. Morty squinted. "You think evil Morty's here?" Rick didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on a figure standing by the ticket booth, an elderly woman in a worn yellow coat. She was sweeping dust from the entrance with slow, careful strokes. When she looked up, her face softened into recognition. "Rick Sanchez," she said quietly. "Took you long enough." Morty blinked.
Wait, you know her?
Rick sighed. "Yeah, I used to."
A long time ago, the woman smiled faintly.
"You told me a joke once," she said. "Said it was the funniest thing in the universe. I laughed so hard I cried."
I still don't remember what it was about. Morty looked between them, confused. You mean...
"She was part of your old adventures." Rick didn't respond right away. He walked closer, his voice low. "You were the first person I tested the humor engine on. Remember that?" The woman nodded slowly.
I remember the laughter. It filled the sky.
People came from miles away. But after a while, it stopped meaning anything. I kept laughing, but I couldn't remember why. Her broom clattered softly against the ground. When the laughing stopped, I stayed.
Someone had to keep the gate open.
"You said you'd come back?" Morty's chest tightened.
Rick, did you just leave her here?
Rick's voice was flat.
It was an experiment, Morty. I didn't think she'd survive this long. The woman chuckled softly. Not bitter, just tired.
"I survived because I waited for you. Every night I told myself the joke again, trying to remember why it mattered." Morty stepped closer. "What was the joke?" She smiled wistfully. "Something about two atoms walking into a bar."
I can't recall the punchline anymore.
"But I remember the way it made me feel. Like life itself was laughing with me." Rick's expression softened for the briefest moment. He took something from his pocket, a small metallic cube humming faintly with blue light. "This belonged to the first prototype," he said quietly. "It recorded emotional frequencies."
I thought it was lost. He pressed a button.
A faint recording played. Static at first, then the sound of a young woman laughing. The laughter was light, real, human. Then it faded into quiet breathing, followed by a much younger Rick's voice. "Don't laugh too hard, kid. The universe hates competition." The woman smiled, tears forming in her eyes.
That's it.
"That's the line." "That was your joke." Morty watched them, his heart heavy.
Rick, you were different back then. Rick looked away.
"Yeah, stupider probably." The wind picked up, rustling the brittle grass. Somewhere in the distance, the carousel let out a slow, metallic groan. The red sun was beginning to dim, its light softening to a dusky gold. The woman stepped forward. "You can stop running, Rick. Whatever this evil Morty is doing..."
Maybe it's time to let him finish the joke. Rick shook his head.
"He's not finishing anything. He's erasing the setup entirely." Morty frowned. "What do you mean?" Rick's tone grew quieter. "Evil Morty thinks pain is the problem. But pain's the reason the punchline hits. Without it, there's no relief."
No joy, no anything. For the first time, Morty heard real weight in Rick's voice. Something like sorrow. The woman sighed.
"I used to think laughter was endless, but maybe it was never meant to be constant. Maybe it's a heartbeat. It comes, it goes, and when it stops, something new begins." Rick looked at her for a long moment. Then he took the cube, turned it in his hands, and placed it gently on the ticket booth counter. "Keep it. It belongs to you more than it ever did to me," she smiled, eyes glistening. "Will you stay this time?" Rick shook his head slowly.
I can't. I've got one more punchline to chase. The wind carried their silence for a few seconds. Soft, weightless, like an unspoken goodbye. Morty whispered, "Rick, you okay?"
Rick adjusted his portal gun. No, Morty, but that's the point, isn't it? Before they left, the woman called after them. Hey, Rick.
I think I remember the joke now.
Rick turned slightly. She grinned through her tears. Two atoms walk into a bar. One says, I think I lost an electron. The other says, are you positive? Morty chuckled a small, sleepy sound.
That's terrible, Rick smiled faintly.
Yeah, but it's real. They stepped through the portal, leaving the park behind as the laughter of one old woman echoed through the twilight. Soft, imperfect, and beautiful. As they disappeared into the folds of space, Morty said quietly, Maybe laughter's not supposed to save us. Rick, maybe it's just supposed to remind us we're still here. Rick didn't answer, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't argue either. The stars drifted by, shimmering faintly, as if the universe itself had just remembered the punchline. The stars looked softer that night, like candle flames behind frosted glass. The ship hummed quietly through the dark, a lullaby in mechanical form. Rick was asleep in the pilot's chair, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. The faint flicker of hyperspace light painted his face in ghostly color. Morty sat in the co-pilot seat, knees pulled up to his chest, staring out into the long river of stars that stretched forever. He didn't know how long he'd been watching them. Time in space felt like a dream half-remembered. He thought about the old woman at Smile Land, her soft laugh, her patience, the way she said she waited for Rick. Who waits that long for anyone anymore? He wondered. There was something about her that clung to him. Something about her smile that felt like the end of a story no one had finished telling. The universe had grown quieter since they left the laughing worlds. The echoes of constant comedy had dimmed, replaced by silence. Not empty, but full of space for thought. It was peaceful in a way that made Morty's chest ache. He turned his gaze toward Rick. The old man's face, usually carved in sarcasm and exhaustion, looked peaceful now, younger almost. Morty found himself whispering, "You don't look so mad when you're asleep, Rick." The hum of the ship responded, low and steady, like the universe was agreeing. He wondered if Rick ever dreamed. Maybe he dreamed of old friends and half-told jokes. Maybe he dreamed of a time before portals and universes, when laughter didn't come from a machine, but from a moment that was just real enough to hurt. Morty reached over to the control panel and dimmed the lights. Outside, the stars seemed to draw closer, as if they'd been waiting to listen. He whispered, "If everything's a joke, then who's supposed to laugh at the sad parts?" The ship's AI, normally sarcastic, didn't answer.
Maybe even it had learned to rest. He leaned back, eyes heavy.
And drifted somewhere between sleep and waking in that half-dream. Morty stood in a field made of soft, glowing dust, like the remnants of burned-out galaxies. Above him, the sky rippled with laughter, faint, nostalgic, like echoes from a memory. And in the middle of that dreamscape sat Rick, the version of him from years ago, maybe even before Morty existed. He looked calm. No flask, no tools, no manic energy. Just Rick, sitting on a porch that overlooked a horizon of fading light. "Hey, kid," the dream Rick said without looking up. Morty hesitated.
"Hey, you? You're not mad?"
Rick smiled faintly.
"Not tonight."
"The universe is asleep." No point yelling at it. Morty walked closer. The wooden boards creaked softly under his feet, even though there was no reason for sound to exist in dreams. You ever think about stopping? You know, the portals, the gadgets,
"All of it?"
Rick's eyes were tired but kind. "Every day." "But the joke keeps running, Morty. Somebody's got to keep timing the punchline." Morty frowned. "What if there isn't a punchline?" Rick chuckled. The old, dry laugh Morty had heard 1,000 times, but softer now. "And the setup's all we've got." The dream shifted. The porch faded into stardust. The quiet sky melted into violet mist. Morty felt weightless, as if floating between thoughts. He saw glimpses, planets they'd visited, faces they'd left behind, laughter that once filled entire worlds, and somewhere, deep in the folds of the dream, the echo of evil Morty's voice. What's so funny about pain? Morty woke up with that question echoing in his chest. The ship's hum was steady again. Rick was still asleep. The stars hadn't moved. Or maybe time just didn't matter here. Morty whispered to himself, maybe nothing's funny about pain, but maybe that's why we laugh. He stood and walked toward the small viewport near the back of the ship, the one that looked directly out into the infinite dark. His reflection merged with the stars, a tiny human outline against cosmic eternity. He thought about laughter, how it always felt like a release, a sigh disguised as joy. Maybe that's what Rick had been chasing all along.
Not comedy.
Not genius. Just permission to breathe. The intercom crackled softly. Rick's voice, half asleep, mumbled, "You talking to yourself again, Morty?" Morty turned.
Nah, just thinking. Rick groaned, eyes still closed. That's dangerous.
Don't start doing that now, Morty smiled faintly.
You ever wish you could stop being funny, Rick? Like, just be quiet for once.
Rick's eyes opened slightly.
You think I haven't tried?
Every time I do, the universe starts crying. Someone's got to keep the rhythm. Morty sat back down beside him.
Yeah, but maybe the rhythm doesn't need a joke.
Maybe it just needs someone to listen. Rick looked at him, really looked, for a long time. The faint light of the console reflected in his eyes. Morty, you keep talking like that and I might actually start respecting you, Morty grinned.
Yeah, that's like the funniest threat you've ever made, Rick chuckled, shaking his head. Kid, you're turning into me, Morty tilted his head.
No, I think I'm turning into whoever you were before all this. For a moment, silence filled the cabin again. But it wasn't awkward.
It was soft.
It was the kind of silence that feels like company. A shared pause between heartbeats. Outside, the stars drifted slower now, like they'd begun listening too. Morty closed his eyes, whispering, maybe laughter's just another way to say we're scared of how beautiful everything is. Rick exhaled. Not a laugh, not a sigh, just something gentle in between. Morty, don't get poetic on me. You'll ruin my reputation, Morty smiled, not opening his eyes.
Yeah, sure thing, Rick. Rick looked out the window again.
The stars shimmered faintly, like a stage curtain before the next act. Somewhere out there, evil Morty was still moving, still working on the next big cosmic twist. But for now, in this tiny pocket of quiet between galaxies, nothing needed to be solved.
Nothing needed to be fixed. Rick leaned back, staring into the infinity that always seemed to mock him.
Maybe the universe isn't one big joke, he muttered. Or maybe it's just a story that never learned how to end. Morty was half asleep when he answered. Then let's keep reading, Rick. Real slow. The ship drifted onward, two small souls sailing through laughter's afterglow. The stars flickered softly, like eyelids closing. There was a strange calm to the way space moved, or didn't move, around them. The laughter that once echoed through galaxies had faded to a hush, like an old theatre after the last applause. Rick steered the ship through the slow shimmer of stardust, every gesture quieter than usual, every sigh carrying a hint of thought he didn't say aloud. Morty sat beside him, chin resting on his hands, eyes half-lidded. "You ever notice," he said softly, "that space looks like static when you're tired?" Rick didn't look up. "That's not static, Morty. That's light that traveled billions of years just to die in front of your face." "Wow," Morty murmured. "That's
kind of depressing," Rick smirked faintly. Nah, that's the punchline, kid.
Every laugh ends the same way, bright, fast, gone. The ship floated through a glowing nebula, gold and violet clouds drifting like slow smoke. Tiny meteors sparkled across its surface, breaking silently apart. The colors reflected across the windshield, painting Rick's face in shades of melancholy. "You know," Rick began, his voice quieter now. "Stars are kind of the universe's best comedians," Morty frowned. "Comedians?" "Yeah," Rick said. "They live big, loud, dramatic lives, full of heat and light."
And then one day they just explode. One last giant laugh before the curtain drops. Morty stared out the window.
"So every star that dies..."
That's like a joke?
Rick took a sip from his flask, not his usual sharp gulp, but something slower, almost reverent. "Not a joke, Morty, more like timing. The universe doesn't tell jokes. It tells stories. Some of them end with fire." They drifted deeper into the nebula. Outside, the stars seemed to pulse faintly as though listening. Morty leaned back in his chair, thinking. "So, if stars are comedians, what are we?" Rick raised an eyebrow. "Critics. The worst kind. We laugh too late and leave before the good part." Morty laughed softly, but the sound came out tired. "You think there's a good part?" Rick looked at him. Really looked, the way someone does when they realize the conversation has turned into something that matters. "There's always a good part. You just don't know it's good until it's gone." Morty nodded, staring into the endless horizon.
Yeah, that checks out. Silence filled the cabin again.
Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that makes everything sound softer. The hum of the engine, the faint crackle of distant radiation, even the quiet rhythm of their breathing. After a while, Morty said, "Rick, what if we just stopped? Like, stop jumping from place to place, stop trying to fix or break everything. What if we just..."
Stayed somewhere for a while?
Rick chuckled under his breath.
Morty, I've seen the multiverse through a microscope and through a hangover.
"The only thing that stops out there is entropy."
Everything else keeps spinning. Yeah, but...
Morty looked out the window. "What if we made a little space where it doesn't have to?" Rick didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, tapping a few buttons on the console. A map flickered into view, a spiral of galaxies glowing like fireflies in a jar. "You see that one?" He pointed to a small, dim cluster near the edge. "Those stars are dying in slow motion. Takes them 1,000,000 years just to fade. The light from their deaths won't reach us until long after we're gone." Morty squinted. "So they're still shining, even though they're already dead?" Rick nodded. "That's the comedy, Morty. Everything you see, every bright, beautiful thing, it's already over. We're just watching the reruns." Morty smiled sadly. "So the universe is one big laugh track," Rick smirked.
Exactly.
"You're catching on?" They both sat quietly for a moment, watching the slow glitter of ancient light. Somewhere out there, stars were collapsing into silence, while others were just beginning their first lines. After a while, Morty asked, "Do you ever think the stars get tired of performing?"
Rick exhaled through his nose.
"All the time. That's why black holes exist. The stars' way of saying, that's enough applause for one lifetime." Morty chuckled.
That's kind of beautiful, actually, Rick shrugged.
"Tragic comedy, kid. It's the only real genre." The nebula outside began to thin, revealing a clearer view of the infinite expanse. A soft blue haze hung over everything, like fog at dawn. Morty could feel himself getting sleepy. The hum of the ship, the rhythm of Rick's voice, it all felt hypnotic. He whispered, "You think laughter and light are like the same thing?" Rick paused.
Maybe. Both are ways of not being afraid of the dark. Morty smiled at that.
It wasn't the kind of smile that came from humor. More like the kind that comes when you finally understand something you didn't realize you were asking about. The stars outside flickered again, brighter this time. One of them flared. A quick, silent bloom of light before fading back into stillness. Morty watched it, eyes heavy. "Another punchline?" he asked. Rick nodded. "Yeah, that one landed just right." They drifted in silence for a while. The laughter of the universe, faint, distant, eternal, seemed to hum beneath everything. Not loud, not demanding, just there like the soft rhythm of a dream. Morty leaned his head against the cold glass.
Do you ever miss it, Rick?
The way things were, before it all got funny, Rick's eyes softened. Every day. But if you keep missing it too long, you start turning into the punchline. Morty let that thought linger in the air, like the last note of a song that refuses to fade. Eventually, he said, "You think the universe ever laughs at us?" Rick gave a small grin. "Only when we deserve it," Morty laughed quietly. "So, pretty often then," Rick smiled too. That took a rare, genuine smile. "Yeah, pretty often." Outside, a dying star flared again, brighter, gentler, as if echoing their laughter. For a moment, it almost looked alive, and in that fleeting light, Morty thought he understood what Rick meant. Every laugh, every loss, every bright thing that burns too fast, it's all part of the same cosmic rhythm. The universe wasn't mocking them. It was laughing with them. Somewhere in the distance, the laughter faded into quiet. Not gone, just resting. The stars blinked slower. The ship drifted through the soft dark like a sigh. Rick took one last sip from his flask and murmured, "Every laugh, Morty."
Every single one is just a little supernova, Morty smiled sleepily.
"And I guess we're made of punchlines," Rick chuckled. "And that kid might be the smartest thing you've ever said." The stars dimmed to a gentle shimmer. The ship floated on, surrounded by the faint, cosmic laughter of everything that ever lived, ever burned, ever smiled at the dark. The ship hovered above a half-broken moon, its surface glittering with tiny fragments of mirror-like rock. Below, silver dust swirled in slow motion, each grain reflecting 1,000 distorted faces of the travelers who had once come here searching for meaning and left with silence. Rick stared down at it,
eyes unfocused.
The humor device sat on the console before him, the same machine that had once drenched entire galaxies in endless laughter. Now it was still, its lights dim, its once manic hum replaced by a low, irregular pulse. Morty approached it hesitantly.
"It's different," he said softly. "It used to sound like..."
Like a crowd. Rick didn't answer right away. He leaned on the control panel, watching the faint flicker on the machine's surface.
"That's because it's tired," he murmured.
"Laughter burns fast, Morty. It doesn't last. You ever notice that?"
"Nobody ever remembers the joke, just how it made them feel for a second." Morty sat beside him.
"So, what now?"
"You gonna turn it off?"
Rick exhaled, his breath fogging the glass.
"No, I'm gonna fix it," Morty blinked. "Fix it?"
"Rick, that thing made the universe laugh until it almost broke itself apart." Rick nodded absently. "Yeah, and maybe it's time it learned something new." He pulled a small screwdriver from his coat and cracked open the metal casing. The inside looked alive, a mess of circuits pulsing faintly like veins, threads of light weaving between components. Rick adjusted a dial, muttering equations to himself that Morty didn't recognize. The ship's lights flickered as if in sympathy. Morty watched, quiet for once. The sound of tools against metal echoed softly, like rain tapping against a window. "What are you changing?" Morty asked. Rick didn't look up. The feedback loop used to convert every emotional signal into laughter, fear, sadness, guilt, even love. The system translated everything into the same punchline. Morty frowned.
"So now it's gonna, what, make people cry instead?"
Rick paused, then smirked faintly.
"Not make them. Let them." The words hung in the air like mist. Rick adjusted another switch, soldered 2 wires, then closed the casing with a slow click.
He ran his thumb over the surface, leaving a faint smudge of oil. The device hummed, not like before, but softer, warmer. It sounded almost like breathing. Morty felt something shift. Not in the air, but in the mood. The same way a song changes key without warning. Rick turned toward him, eyes tired but calm. "We've been laughing at everything for too long, Morty. Sometimes you've got to let the joke end. He pressed the button. The ship filled with a faint vibration, like the whisper of a faraway wave. The mirrors below began to shimmer, their reflections bending and reshaping. Morty felt a strange tug in his chest. Not pain exactly, but something heavier. Images flickered across the ship's walls. Not holograms, not projections, but memories. He saw himself as a kid, sitting on the couch beside his mom watching cartoons. He remembered laughing, not because the jokes were funny, but because she laughed first. He saw his dad standing in the kitchen late at night, staring at a glass of water as if waiting for it to explain something. He saw Rick, not the genius, not the loudmouth, but a man sitting alone in the garage one night, staring at an old photo for far too long. Morty blinked hard. "Rick, what is this?" Rick's voice was low. Feedback from every signal the machine ever collected. All those laughs had somewhere to go.
All that emotion had to mean something. Morty watched another image ripple through the air. A planet full of people laughing, then crying, then holding each other.
The sound was overwhelming and tender at once, a chorus of vulnerability. For the first time, the universe wasn't laughing at itself. It was feeling. Rick sat back in his chair, eyes glinting. "See, Morty, humor's just the body's way of sneaking up on sadness.
This thing...
It's finally being honest." Morty wiped his eyes, surprised to find them wet.
It's beautiful, Rick. Rick chuckled.
"Don't get sentimental on me, kid."
You'll make the machine jealous. But even as he said it,
Morty could tell there was something different in Rick's tone. A tremor, a crack at the edge of sarcasm. The ship floated in silence again, surrounded by ghostly light. The machine pulsed faintly, sending waves of soft resonance through the metal floor. Morty whispered, Do you think
people need to cry?"
Rick looked at him. "People need to cry, Morty. Crying's just laughter with better honesty. It's the same energy by color. One goes up, one goes down. Same heartbeat underneath." Morty thought about that for a while. Outside, a nearby star collapsed into a faint glow, its light flickering gently like a candle. Rick leaned forward and opened a small compartment on the console. Inside was an old microchip, the core of the humor device's original algorithm. He held it between his fingers, staring at the faintly glowing lines on its surface. "This little piece of metal," he said quietly, "once made billions of people laugh without knowing why."
"That's power, Morty, but power without meaning." It's noise. He placed the chip back down.
"Now it'll do something better. It'll give them the space to feel again." Morty smiled softly.
"You're kind of like..."
"Reprogramming the universe's heart, huh?" Rick sighed, looking out at the quiet stars. "Nah, Morty, just teaching it to breathe again." The machine emitted a gentle hum like the sound of rain on glass. Light rippled outward, fading into the void. Across distant worlds, the laughter that had once shaken skies was replaced by quiet. A tender silence filled with tears, sighs and small, grateful smiles. Morty felt a weight lift from his chest, replaced by something fragile and good.
"It's weird, Rick," he whispered.
"I thought laughter was supposed to make you feel better. But this feels real." Rick closed his eyes. "That's because laughter's easy."
"Feeling is hard."
"But the universe doesn't need easy anymore." They sat together in the dim cabin, surrounded by faint echoes of emotion spreading across the stars. The machine glowed one last time. Not bright, but deep, as if it had learned something profound. And then it went quiet. Rick didn't touch it again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of every joke, every laugh, every tear the universe had ever shared. Morty finally broke the stillness with a whisper. "So, what now?" Rick looked at him with a soft, weary smile. "Now, kid, we let the punchline rest." The stars shimmered faintly outside, and the moon below reflected their quiet light. Like tears, frozen in space. The universe exhaled. The stars looked tired that evening. If stars could even be tired. Their light didn't sparkle like it used to. It shimmered softly, as if remembering something faintly amusing and a little sad. Rick and Morty floated through that starlit stillness, the ship gliding without sound. Morty sat in the co-pilot seat, gazing out. "Feels quiet out there now," he said, like the universe finally ran out of punchlines. Rick sipped from a mug that might have once held coffee, though by now it was mostly just warmth. "That's because it's recovering from the hangover, Morty. Infinite laughter's just emotional noise. You drown in it long enough, silence starts to sound like mercy." Morty nodded. "So where are we headed now?" Rick tapped a few glowing coordinates on the console. "The planet of forgotten jokes. I used to go there sometimes, back before I started taking humor seriously." Morty frowned. "Wait, you used to go there? You've been to this place before?"
Rick gave a half grin. "Kid, I've been everywhere people tried to escape themselves."
"That's where all the good material comes from." The ship slipped into a wormhole, light bending around them like stretched glass. When they emerged, a pale planet hung before them, grey and silver, covered in fields of cracked glass that sparkled like confetti frozen mid-air. Morty pressed his face to the viewport.
"It looks..."
"Sad," Rick corrected him gently. "Not sad. Honest." They landed near a valley of hollow shapes, giant sculptures shaped like old comedy masks, their stone faces smiling faintly. The air smelled like dust and memory. As they stepped out, their boots sank into the soft, shimmering ground, crunching faintly underfoot. Everywhere around them lay words, fragments of jokes, etched into the ground like fossils. Morty knelt and brushed away the dust from one line. Why did the photon refuse to check a bag? He read the punchline aloud softly, voice barely above a whisper. Because it was traveling light. And then something strange happened. Not loud, not grand, just a small human sound. Rick chuckled. Not a sarcastic laugh.
Not a deflection.
Just a laugh, real, round, gentle. Morty turned to him, eyes wide.
"You actually laughed?"
Rick rubbed the back of his neck, pretending to study the sky. "Yeah, well, maybe it's aged well." Morty grinned.
"I didn't even think you could laugh like that anymore." Rick didn't answer.
He crouched and ran his hand across another stone, revealing the faded punchline of a long-lost jest. Each one felt like an echo. Someone somewhere once thought these were the funniest words they'd ever heard. Now all that remained was the warmth of memory, fossilized into rock. They walked for what felt like hours through the valley, surrounded by the whispers of forgotten laughter. The air shimmered faintly with residual joy, tiny bursts of giggles that escaped from the cracks in the stones, carried by the wind like pollen. Morty finally broke the silence.
"Rick, why do people forget jokes?"
Rick's eyes softened, the starlight reflecting in them. "Because jokes aren't meant to last, Morty. They're little bridges between loneliness. You cross them, you move on. Nobody keeps a bridge once they've made it home." Morty thought about that. "So all these jokes."
They were like, "What?"
"Temporary homes?" Rick smiled faintly. "Exactly." They reached the center of the valley, a huge circular platform carved into the ground, covered in overlapping symbols. In the middle stood an ancient metal frame, half buried, humming faintly. Morty tilted his head. "What is that thing?" Rick ran his scanner across it, the screen flickering with faint light. "Prototype humor storage node, early model. Probably predates most sentient civilizations in this quadrant." Morty leaned closer.
"You mean someone built a place just to keep jokes?"
Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, people tried to preserve laughter once. Like they thought it was something sacred, too fragile to lose." Morty hesitated. Was it? Rick stared at the cracked machine for a long moment. Maybe. Depends on what you think laughter means. He brushed some dust off the device's side and found a faint inscription. The letters were worn, but he read them aloud anyway. Every joke was once someone's light in the dark. Morty's breath caught.
That's kind of beautiful. Rick didn't say anything for a while.
Then he pulled out his multi-tool and carefully reconnected a few cables. The device flickered to life, humming softly. Holographic lights rose into the air, forming silhouettes. Blurry, glowing echoes of people laughing. Not faces, just outlines like shadows made of memory. Each one whispered faintly, half-formed sentences carried on the wind. Knock, knock. Did you hear about... Once there was a...
And then silence.
The holograms looked at each other and faded away. Morty swallowed. They forgot the punchlines, Rick sighed, leaning on his knees.
That's what happens when people stop needing them. He stood up, stretching his back. But maybe that's okay, Morty frowned. Okay, Rick nodded.
Yeah, maybe the point was never the joke. Maybe it was the moment someone decided to share it. Morty smiled faintly.
You sound...
Different, Rick smirked. Don't get used to it. They sat down on the cracked stone, watching the last traces of holographic laughter fade into the night. The stars above shimmered softly, their light slower, almost sleepy. Morty lay back against the cool ground. Hey, Rick? Yeah, Morty? Do you ever think about all the times you made people laugh and wonder if...
Maybe you were just trying to stop yourself from crying.
Rick looked up at the stars. His mouth twitched like he was about to joke, but he didn't. Not this time. Yeah, he said quietly.
Every damn time. The words drifted into the air, mingling with the faint hum of the planet. Morty smiled sadly.
Guess the universe really does remember every joke, huh? Rick tilted his head, considering.
Maybe not the words.
But it remembers the warmth, the part that mattered. A gentle breeze moved through the valley, carrying faint laughter like wind chimes. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was soft, almost reverent. Rick stood and dusted off his coat.
See, come on, Morty, we've paid our respects. Morty looked around one last time.
Feels wrong to leave them here. Rick placed a hand on his shoulder. They're not here, Morty. They're out there, floating between stars, waiting for someone to need them again. As they boarded the ship, Morty turned back toward the shimmering valley, one last time. The stones glowed faintly in the ship's exhaust light. A million punchlines frozen in time. Rick started the engines, and as they rose into the air, he muttered almost to himself, "Every joke dies, Morty."
But laughter, that's eternal. Morty smiled through the glass.
The valley below faded into distance, a glittering sea of forgotten warmth. For a moment, the universe didn't feel empty. It felt full of things once shared, once loved, once funny, and as the stars slowly pulled them onward, the last sound that echoed behind them was not laughter, but something quieter, something like peace. The night they left the planet of forgotten jokes, Rick didn't speak for a long time. The stars outside the ship's window passed in gentle lines, stretching like threads of memory pulled across black silk. Morty had fallen asleep in his seat, his head tilted to one side, mouth slightly open, the kind of sleep that only comes to someone who's been laughing and crying in the same breath. Rick stared at the kid for a while. There was something peaceful about it, something that reminded him of a time long before Morty, before portals, before devices, before the need to fix everything with a joke. He closed his eyes. And that's when the dream began. It didn't start like dreams usually do. There was no sudden change, no confusion. The dream simply was as if it had always been waiting behind his eyelids, patient, familiar, inevitable. He was standing in his old garage. The smell of burnt circuits and spilled whiskey lingered in the air. On the workbench lay the prototype humor device, but it wasn't glowing now.
It was weeping.
Little drops of golden light rolled down its metal sides, evaporating before they touched the floor. Rick walked closer.
You crying too?
He asked softly, his voice carrying that worn-out sarcasm he used as armor. The machine pulsed faintly, responding in static bursts that almost sounded like laughter. Laughter that didn't quite know if it was still laughter. Then he saw himself. Younger. Cleaner. The lab coat unstained, eyes bright with the arrogance of discovery. That version of Rick was laughing uncontrollably, surrounded by holograms of people, faces of old friends, long-lost loves, even strangers, all laughing with him. It was deafening. Look at us, huh? The younger, Rick shouted over the noise.
We did it.
We made the universe laugh.
We proved it could all be funny.
But the older Rick, the one dreaming, didn't smile. He just watched. Because now he could see what he couldn't see back then, the way the laughter bent, the edges of it cracking into hysteria, the way every smile was slightly too wide. He tried to speak, but his words came out backward, like the dream was playing in reverse. Every time he opened his mouth, sound folded in on itself, laughter becoming sobs, joy turning into static. He reached out toward his younger self, and as he did, the scene began to rewind faster. The holograms dissolved into pixels. The light dimmed. The laughter became a single echo, stretched and distorted until it sounded like breathing. The younger Rick kept laughing, but now the sound was silent, like a film running with no audio. And then everything stopped. The garage was empty.
Only one light flickered overhead.
The humor device sat quiet, its tears gone. On the bench beside it was a small piece of paper, aged and yellowed. Rick picked it up and read the handwriting. It said, "Remember, Rick, you didn't invent laughter. You just borrowed it for a while." He turned the note over, and on the back, written in his own handwriting, was another line, "Give it back when you're done." He didn't remember writing it, but he believed it. A quiet sound broke through the silence. A laugh, small and familiar. Rick turned and saw Morty as a child, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the dream.
Holding a broken robot head like a stuffed animal. Hey.
"Grandpa," the dream Morty said softly. "Was it worth it?" Rick's throat tightened. Was what worth it? All the laughing. Rick knelt down, his lab coat brushing the dream floor like fog.
I don't know, kid.
Sometimes it kept me alive. Sometimes it just kept me loud. Dream Morty smiled sadly. "You're quieter now." Rick looked down. "Guess I ran out of punchlines." Morty tilted his head. "That's okay. The silence suits you." The lights around them dimmed further, dissolving into stars. The garage vanished. The floor became starlight, and the ceiling turned into space. The younger Rick appeared one last time, standing in the distance, looking up at the same stars. But this time, he wasn't laughing. He was simply watching, his face calm, like he'd finally heard the music behind the silence. The older Rick, the one dreaming, took a slow breath. "I thought laughter was control," he said softly. "But maybe it was surrender." The younger Rick turned toward him, faintly glowing at the edges, a reflection of who he used to be. "Then let go," he said. "The joke's over. It doesn't need you to keep it alive," Rick tried to answer, but the dream began to fade. The stars bent inward, collapsing into a spiral of light. The sound of laughter reversed itself, becoming a soft sigh, like an audience applauding at the end of a long show. And just before waking, Rick saw one last image, the humor device dissolving into dust, rising into the air like golden smoke. Each particle whispered a different line, fragments of every joke he'd ever told. But now, instead of echoing laughter, they hummed with something else entirely. Peace. Rick woke up in the ship, heart steady. The hum of the engine was the only sound. Morty was still asleep beside him, faintly smiling in his dreams. Rick exhaled, a long, tired, almost relieved exhale. He looked out the window at the stars and murmured to himself, "Guess that's it then." The punchline's gone home. The navigation screen flickered softly with a new signal, a planet glowing faintly blue, not marked, not named. It called to them quietly, without sound or message, like a calm thought in the back of the mind. Rick reached over and adjusted the course. The ship turned slowly, the stars shifting like curtains being drawn open. He looked at Morty and whispered, "Get some rest, kid. We're going somewhere quieter." As the ship drifted toward the blue horizon, the stars outside began to dim, not fading but softening, as if preparing for sleep themselves. Rick leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes again. Somewhere between waking and dreaming, he heard faint laughter. Not the wild, desperate kind, but a low, steady sound, like the universe exhaling after a long story, and for the first time in a long time, Rick didn't need to understand it. He just let it be. The ship glided through the ink-dark silence of space, following the faint pulse of blue light that called from beyond the stars. The hum of the engines was steady, soft enough that it could almost be mistaken for breathing. Morty stirred awake, rubbing his eyes, confused by the glow on the horizon. "Grandpa Rick." "Where are we?" Rick didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the blue shimmer growing in the distance. Not quite a planet, not quite a star. It pulsed like a heartbeat. "I don't know, Morty," he said finally, his voice quiet.
But it's calling us.
And for once,
I think we should listen instead of talk. Morty blinked, still groggy.
"You mean—"
No more jokes?
Rick smirked faintly. "Maybe later. For now, let's see what happens when we stop trying to make everything funny." They approached the glowing world. Its surface wasn't solid. It was a vast ocean of light, rippling gently like water made of memories. The closer they got, the more it felt familiar. It was warm, not with heat, but with feeling. Rick landed the ship on a hovering patch of luminous mist. The door opened, and the two stepped out. There was no gravity, yet their feet found ground, or something like it. Every step sent ripples of light through the surface, as though the world itself was reacting to their presence. Morty looked around in awe. This place...
It feels alive? Rick nodded. Yeah, it's like walking through someone's dream. Maybe everyone's dream. He took out his scanner, but it flickered uselessly.
Every reading came back blank, overwhelmed by an infinite data surge. Whatever this place was, it didn't want to be measured. It wanted to be felt. For a long while, they just walked. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a hum, like distant laughter slowed down to the rhythm of a heartbeat. Every now and then, faint images flickered in the light. Faces, fragments of memory, echoes of joy. A child laughing, a scientist smiling at their first experiment, a family sharing a meal. Morty pointed at one of the images. A little girl tossing glitter into the air, her laughter illuminating the scene. "What is that?" Rick stared for a moment before answering. "It's..."
Laughter that outlived the people who made it. Echoes, the light shimmered.
Forming another image, a younger Rick sitting beside Beth as a child, showing her constellations through a cheap telescope. Morty's voice softened.
"That's you." Rick didn't speak.
He just stood there watching his younger self in the glow. The younger Rick was smiling. Not the sarcastic grin Morty was used to, but something unguarded. Pure. Then slowly the image dissolved into the light. Morty glanced up at him. "You okay?"
Rick inhaled through his nose.
"Yeah. Just remembering that not everything that shines is meant to last." They kept walking until they reached the heart of the luminous ocean. A small, circular space where the light gathered in a column, swirling gently upward. Inside the column floated something tiny and intricate, a fragment of metal. Morty recognized it immediately. Wait, is that part of your humor device? Rick stepped closer, his reflection rippling in the light. The fragment hovered in front of him, glowing softly as if waiting. Guess even the universe didn't want to throw it away, Rick murmured. Morty frowned. So what do we do with it? Rick reached out and touched it. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the entire ocean pulsed. The ripples of light expanded outward, and suddenly every echo around them began to glow brighter. The laughter, the faces, the memories. Morty gasped.
Rick, what's happening?
Rick's voice was calm.
It's giving it back.
The laughter we borrowed. The column of light rose higher, and Rick's reflection split into two. His younger self and his present self facing each other across the glow. Younger Rick smiled faintly. You finally stopped trying to control the joke. Older Rick looked weary but peaceful. Yeah, turns out the punchline didn't need me.
It just needed to be heard. As the light swirled faster, the two reflections began to merge.
Morty stood back, squinting through the brightness.
Rick's voice came from everywhere at once.
Morty, listen to me. If laughter is energy, it never really dies. It just changes shape. The light grew so bright that Morty had to close his eyes. And then, silence. When he opened them again, the world of light had vanished. They were back inside the ship, hovering in orbit. The planet below was gone, replaced by a calm stretch of stars. Morty blinked. Wait, what just happened? Rick sat at the console, staring at his hands. They were trembling slightly.
But he was smiling, faintly sincerely. I think we
Gave something back, Rick said softly. And maybe got something in return. Morty tilted his head. What's that? Rick looked out the window. The stars were twinkling brighter now, like laughter, scattered across the cosmos. Silence, Rick whispered.
And a bit of peace.
Haven't had either in a while. For a while, neither of them spoke. The stars drifted by, slow and gentle. Finally, Morty leaned back in his seat. Hey, Rick.
Yeah, Morty. Do you think we'll ever be funny again?
Rick chuckled, a low, tired sound.
Kid, if you're laughing, then yeah, we're already there, Morty smiled. So what now?
Rick reached for the controls, setting a new course into open space. Now we drift.
Let the universe breathe.
Maybe there's something out there that doesn't need fixing, just watching. Morty nodded, yawning. Cool. Kinda nice to not be running for once. Rick smirked. Don't get used to it. But there was warmth in his voice, a quiet acceptance that felt new. As the ship moved forward, a soft glow trailed behind it, faint remnants of the blue light that had wrapped around them. The light didn't fade. It lingered, stretching into the void like laughter turned into music. And somewhere, in that endless silence between stars and memory, something eternal stirred. Laughter, not as noise, but as light. Not as escape, but as connection. It shimmered across the cosmos, gentle as dawn breaking after a long night. And for once, Rick didn't need to chase it. He just watched it drift, a fragment of joy set free. The next morning, or what passed for morning, in the slow spin of space, Rick and Morty sat in the ship's lounge. The windows were open to the void, a field of quiet stars watching like ancient audience members who had forgotten to clap. The galaxy outside shimmered faintly, each star still echoing the light they'd unleashed the night before. Morty was sitting cross-legged on the floor, notebook open, pencil hovering above the page. Rick sat nearby, tinkering with a half-finished gadget that hummed quietly but never quite came alive. It had been hours since they'd said anything. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was full, like a room that remembered every word ever spoken in it. Morty finally sighed.
Rick, can I ask you something?
Rick didn't look up. You're already asking, Morty. Morty frowned. When you were young, did you laugh like, for real? Not the sarcastic kind. The kind where it actually hurts your stomach. Rick paused, screwdriver hovering mid-turn. For once, he didn't have a smart remark ready. Yeah, he said softly, used to. Before I learned that laughter doesn't fix things, or it just hides them. Morty nodded, writing something down. Yeah, I kind of figured. Rick glanced over, squinting at the notebook. What's that, homework? Don't tell me you're writing memoirs. Nobody wants the diary of Morty Sanchez. Morty smirked a little. It's a joke, actually, Rick blinked. A joke? Yeah, I've been thinking, maybe if laughter was what broke everything, maybe it can fix something too. Just the right kind of laughter. Rick leaned back in his chair.
All right, hit me.
What's the joke, Morty? Morty shook his head quickly. No, not yet.
It's not ready. Rick rolled his eyes, but didn't press further.
Instead, he turned his attention back to the gadget, and though his movement slowed, his mind wasn't on circuits or wires. It was somewhere else entirely. Hours passed. The ship floated silently through the faint mists of a dying nebula. Morty kept writing, crossing out lines, doodling, muttering to himself. Rick occasionally looked up, watching the boy's focus, his frown of concentration. It reminded him of someone.
Maybe himself.
Maybe Beth. When Morty finally looked up, his eyes were tired, but soft. Okay, he said.
I think I got it. Rick turned in his chair, half grinning.
All right, let's hear the comedy revolution, kid. Morty took a deep breath. So, there's this scientist. He spends his whole life trying to make people laugh. He builds this giant machine, and it works. Everyone laughs forever. But one day he realizes nobody remembers why they were laughing. Rick's expression didn't change, but his gaze drifted toward the stars. Morty continued quietly. So the scientist walks outside, looks up at the sky, and tells the universe his last joke.
And the universe laughs, just once.
And then finally, it sighs. There was a pause, not of confusion, but of stillness. Rick didn't respond right away. He just looked at Morty, his face unreadable. Then slowly he chuckled. Not loudly, not mockingly, but softly. The kind of laugh that trembles in the chest before it escapes. Not bad, Morty, he said, voice low. Not bad at all. Morty smiled faintly.
You think it's funny?
Rick shook his head. Nah, but it's true, which is better. They sat quietly again. The light from the nebula outside shifted from violet to deep blue, washing the cabin in a color that felt like calm. Rick leaned back, hands behind his head. You know, kid, I spent most of my life thinking comedy was armor, that if you laugh first, the world can't hurt you. Turns out it just keeps you from feeling anything real. Morty stared down at his notebook.
Yeah, maybe that's why people laugh at funerals. Not because it's funny, but because they don't know what else to do. Rick gave a faint smile. You're starting to sound like a philosopher, Morty. Don't do that. You'll get a beard and a podcast, Morty laughed, soft and tired.
Nah, I'm just thinking. Dangerous habit, Rick muttered, but the warmth in his tone made it sound like approval. Later, as the ship drifted closer to a small, pale moon, Morty wandered to the window. The stars reflected in his eyes, hundreds of tiny lights that seemed to breathe. Rick joined him, silent for once. Together they watched the moon's surface slowly turn beneath them. Morty broke the quiet. Do you ever think about what happens after all the adventures, Rick? Like, when we're done? When the laughs run out? Rick's reply came after a long pause. Yeah, all the time. But I figure that's the punchline, Morty. You never know when it's coming, so you might as well enjoy the setup. Morty nodded slowly.
I think I get that now. Rick's eyes softened.
Do you, though? Yeah, Morty said quietly. It's not about being funny. It's about being kind. Rick blinked, genuinely surprised.
That's actually profound, Morty grinned.
Told you the joke was good. They both laughed, short, genuine, and real. The kind of laugh that didn't hide anything. And for a moment, time felt suspended. The laughter didn't echo or fade. It simply was. That night, or whatever the stars called night, Morty fell asleep at the console, his notebook open beside him. The last line read, "If laughter is light, then maybe kindness is the space it travels through." Rick stood over him for a while, reading it silently. Then he closed the notebook and set it on the dashboard. Outside, the stars flickered like candles. Not chaotic, but calm. Rick gazed at them, whispering something under his breath that Morty would never hear. Then, with a small grin, he muttered, "Guess the kid finally wrote one worth remembering." He sat beside him, the hum of the ship lulling them both. The engines purred softly, like the universe itself, breathing slow and steady. Rick's eyes drifted shut, not in exhaustion, but in peace. The corners of his mouth curled upward, faintly amused at nothing in particular. For once, there was no noise.
No running, no fixing, no arguing.
Just two travelers floating between galaxies, wrapped in the warmth of a quiet joke that didn't need to be explained. And somewhere in the distance, the laughter of the cosmos shimmered again, not loud, not forced, but light, gentle, eternal. It sounded like rest. The next day began without noise, not silence exactly, more like the absence of everything that wasn't meant to stay. The ship drifted through an endless dusk, its hull reflecting the violet glow of a nearby dying star. The light wasn't bright anymore. It pulsed faintly, as if exhaling. Rick sat at the edge of the open ramp, legs dangling into space. His lab coat fluttered slightly in the ship's internal breeze, and his hair looked almost silver under the soft cosmic light. He held a small flask in his hand, empty now, but he wasn't drinking, just holding it, turning it slowly as if it contained a memory instead of liquid. Morty joined him quietly, holding two steaming mugs of something that smelled like artificial cocoa. Rick didn't look up when Morty sat beside him, but his shoulders shifted, a silent acknowledgement. Morty took a sip, staring at the distant star. "You think it's going to go soon?" he asked. Rick nodded slightly. "Yeah, every light runs out eventually."
Even the funny ones. They sat there for a while, the glow from the star bathing them in lavender hues.
The color didn't hurt their eyes. It felt like it was cradling them. Around them, fragments of the machine they'd destroyed days ago drifted, tiny shards of laughter-infused stardust. Each particle shimmered faintly like a giggle too small to hear. Morty watched them float. "It's weird," he said softly.
It feels like the universe is quieter now.
"Like it finally stopped telling jokes," Rick chuckled under his breath. "Maybe it just learned better timing." Morty smiled faintly but said nothing. A long pause stretched between them. It wasn't uncomfortable.
It was sacred, Rick finally spoke again, voice low.
"You know, Morty, I used to think laughter was proof we were alive. That if you could still laugh, nothing was completely broken." Morty tilted his head. "And now?" Rick took a deep breath. "Now I think
it's the other way around.
We laugh to remember we're still trying to live.
It's not the cure.
It's just the reminder." Morty nodded slowly. "Yeah, like when you're crying, but someone says something dumb and you laugh anyway." Rick smiled faintly.
Exactly that. They watched the star pulse again.
Each flash grew softer, slower, its rhythm fading into peace. After a while, Morty reached into his pocket and pulled out the notebook he'd been carrying since the last planet.
"I wrote another one," he said, flipping it open. Rick raised an eyebrow.
"Another joke?" Morty nodded.
"Kind of." Rick leaned back. "All right, hit me." Morty cleared his throat, though his voice trembled slightly. "Okay, there's this old scientist and his grandson.
They travel across the universe looking for something funny.
But after a while they realized the funniest things were the ones that just happened when nobody was trying." He looked at Rick nervously, waiting for a reaction. Rick didn't laugh.
He didn't even smile. He just stared ahead, eyes unfocused, lips pressed together like he was holding something fragile in his chest. Then finally, He let out a breath that sounded almost like a sigh, almost like a chuckle. That's not bad, Morty. You're getting good at this whole philosophy through punchline thing. Morty smiled faintly. Yeah, well.
You're a good teacher, Rick scoffed lightly, but there was warmth in his tone. Please.
The day I teach anyone anything worth keeping is the day the multiverse apologizes. They both laughed quietly not because it was funny, but because the sound itself felt necessary. Like stretching after a long nap, hours passed in the slow rhythm of the cosmos. The violet star dimmed further, fading into a soft blue glow. Its final light spilled across their faces, making them look almost like shadows painted with memory. Rick leaned back on his hands, eyes half closed. You ever wonder, he murmured, why things that end always look the most beautiful right before they do? Morty hesitated. Maybe 'cause that's when we're finally paying attention. Rick looked over at him, and for the first time in a long while, his smile wasn't tired.
It wasn't hiding anything.
It just was. You're not wrong, kid. The two sat in silence, the sound of the ship's hum blending with the faint whisper of starlight outside. The galaxy spun lazily around them, a slow dance of light and gravity that seemed endless, yet fragile. Rick picked up a small fragment of the laughter machine floating near his boot. It glowed faintly between his fingers, like a firefly. Funny thing, he said softly. This little piece used to make the whole universe laugh.
Now it's just quiet. Morty watched him turn it over in his palm. You gonna keep it?
Rick shrugged.
Maybe, maybe not.
Feels like one of those things that means more when you let it drift away. He opened his hand, and the shard floated gently upward, catching the dying starlight as it rose. For a moment it shimmered gold, then disappeared into the violet sky. Morty's eyes followed it until it vanished completely.
It's kind of beautiful, Rick smirked.
Don't get poetic on me now, Morty. That's my job. Morty laughed softly, his voice tired but full of peace. You're terrible at it, Rick chuckled.
Yeah, guess I am. They stayed there as the last flicker of the star dimmed to nothing.
The world didn't end. It just got quieter. The violet faded into soft grey, then deep blue. The colour of calm oceans, of rest. Rick finally spoke, voice nearly a whisper. You know, Morty, the funniest part of life
is that it ever happened at all. Morty looked at him, eyes heavy with warmth.
Yeah, he said.
That's the best one yet, Rick smiled. A real one this time.
Then he leaned back, staring into the dark, letting his laughter fade into a slow, peaceful hum. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The ship floated quietly between galaxies, wrapped in starlight and memory, and somewhere in that infinite quiet, a soft sound lingered. The quietest laugh the universe had ever known. It wasn't loud enough to hear, but it was just enough to feel. It began like a sigh from something ancient, a long, slow breath that rolled through the cosmos. Quiet enough to miss, yet strong enough to move galaxies. The ship's sensors flickered for a moment, then went still. Outside, the stars pulsed once, twice, and then dimmed into a soft, rhythmic glow, like the heartbeat of the universe slowing down. Rick sat in the pilot's chair, but his hands didn't move. He wasn't navigating anymore. He was simply watching the way starlight bent against the glass, how space itself seemed to ripple with rest. His coat hung loosely from his shoulders, the wrinkles of a lifetime finally unbothered. His eyes, half-lidded, looked softer than Morty had ever seen them. Morty entered quietly, barefoot. The ship's floor hummed faintly, a low vibration that felt almost alive. He stood behind Rick for a long time, unsure whether to speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was reverent, like the air in a church that nobody prayed in anymore. You feel that? Rick said without turning around. His voice was low, slow, almost tender. Morty frowned. Feel what? Rick gestured lazily toward the window.
That exhale, the universe letting go.
Like it's been laughing for billions of years and it's finally tired. Morty looked out. The view was different now. Planets glowed faintly in soft halos, their atmospheres calm and pale. Even the colors had quieted. No more neon greens or harsh blues, in just twilight tones, soothing and endless. It feels kind of peaceful, Morty said. Like everything's gonna sleep, Rick nodded. That's the thing, Morty. Even chaos has to rest sometime. He leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him. His gaze drifted to the distant clusters of light folding in on themselves, galaxies curling like blankets around invisible centers. It didn't look like destruction. It looked like comfort. Morty moved to sit beside him.
Do you think it's really ending? Rick exhaled through his nose. Endings are a matter of perspective, kid. Maybe this is just...
The punchline landing, Morty gave a small laugh.
That's a pretty dark joke, Rick. Rick smirked.
Yeah, well, it's been that kind of episode. They sat together in the fading light. Outside, stars flickered like candles, some going out quietly, others burning one last time before dimming into the dark. Each flicker was a memory, a whisper of something that once mattered and still did, even if no one remembered why. Morty thought about the worlds they'd visited, the laughing cities, the silent towns, the machine that cried. Every story felt like a version of the same thing, people trying to understand why anything mattered at all.
And laughing to make the question less heavy. Rick, Morty said after a while, when you built that laughter thing...
What were you really trying to do? Rick didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted into the endless horizon of colorless light. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded fragile, like glass catching sunlight. I thought maybe if I could make everything funny, I'd never have to feel the not funny parts again. You know, that the guilt, the mistakes, the stuff you can't invent your way out of. Morty was quiet. The hum of the ship filled the space where words didn't need to go. But it turns out, Rick continued, if you laugh long enough, you stop hearing the real things. The small stuff that keeps you human. The quiet. He looked at Morty then, really looked at him. You brought it back, kid. You gave the universe its quiet again. Morty looked down at his hands, fidgeting slightly.
I didn't do much, Rick chuckled softly.
You listened. That's more than most people ever do. Outside, a comet drifted past, slow, glowing faintly pink against the dark. Its tail shimmered like a soft brushstroke of watercolor across the stars. Rick and Morty watched it fade, leaving behind a faint trail that looked like laughter's afterimage. Morty leaned back against the seat.
You think there's a sound to all this?
Like, when stars fade, do they make a sound? Rick smiled faintly. Maybe, but if they do, it's probably not something you hear. More like something you feel. Like that heavy lifted off your chest kind of quiet. Morty nodded slowly. Yeah, like after you cry, Rick grinned. You're getting too poetic again, Morty. Morty laughed quietly. Guess it's contagious. The two of them fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't because there was nothing left to say. It was because everything had already been said, in 1,000 different ways, across 1,000 worlds, through laughter and tears and small moments that no one else would ever see. Hours, maybe days passed. Time had stopped behaving like it used to. It stretched and curled, soft and uneven. Rick closed his eyes, feeling the slow pulse of existence, the universe's last joke turning into a lullaby. He whispered, almost to himself, You know, Morty, the universe doesn't really end. It just learns to breathe slower. Morty turned to him. Rick's head rested slightly against the chair, his eyes closed but not asleep. His face looked lighter, as if the weight of 1,000 dimensions had finally drifted off. Rick? Morty said softly. Rick didn't respond immediately, but then he smiled faintly.
Still here, kid, just resting. Morty smiled too.
Good. He looked out the window again. The galaxies continued their slow fade, shimmering like dying fireflies. But the darkness wasn't frightening. It was deep, kind, forgiving. Somewhere far away, a faint echo of laughter rippled through the cosmos. Not loud, not forced, just one last gentle sound.
A memory of joy, a reminder, Rick murmured. There it is.
The universe laughing itself to sleep, Morty whispered back. Guess it learned from you. Rick chuckled, barely audible. Maybe it did. They stayed there side by side as the final lights dimmed. No explosions, no endings, just a soft exhale. The hum of the ship blended with the pulse of the universe until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. In that stillness, everything felt complete. The stars rested. The laughter rested. Even Rick, the man who could never stop running, finally rested too. And for the first time since creation, the universe simply exhaled. The ship drifted without sound, a lone speck in a galaxy that had forgotten how to shine. The dashboard lights blinked lazily, like sleepy eyes on the verge of closing. Every hum, every pulse, every mechanical whisper felt slower now, as though the universe itself had decided that it had said enough. Morty sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the stars melt into dark velvet. His reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, half boy, half memory. Behind him, Rick snored lightly, his head tilted back, mouth slightly open, the faint trace of a smile tugging at one corner. For once it wasn't a smirk born of arrogance or irony.
It was contentment. Morty didn't want to move.
The stillness was sacred. Every sound, the low drone of the engines, the gentle ticking of cooling metal, felt like part of a lullaby he didn't want to interrupt. He whispered, not to Rick, but to the cosmos, "Is this what peace sounds like?" No answer came, yet the silence responded, wrapping him in something warmer than words. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his knees. His breath fogged the glass for a moment, fading quickly into the cold beyond. Through that brief mist, he imagined seeing all the people and planets they had met along the way. Laughing faces, broken machines, forgotten gods, lost jokes floating through time. Everything that ever existed still echoing faintly, like the memory of a song after the last note fades. Morty closed his eyes. The laughter that had once filled the universe, the absurd, unending, ridiculous laughter, was gone now. But in its place was something softer. The quiet had meaning again. A gentle vibration ran through the floor. Rick stirred, blinking once, then twice, like a man waking from the longest nap in history. "Still awake, kid?" he murmured. Morty smiled without turning. Didn't want to miss it. Rick rubbed his eyes, stretching his arms behind his head. "Miss what?" "There's nothing left but the encore." Morty pointed toward the window.
Exactly. Rick's gaze followed, and for a while he said nothing.
Out there, a single star pulsed faintly. It flickered like a candle in the wind, struggling not because it feared the dark, but because it wanted to stay a moment longer. Rick exhaled softly. Didn't think anything'd hang on this long." "Maybe it's got one last joke left," Morty said, a small grin tugging at his lips. Rick smirked. Let's hope it's a good one." They sat side by side again. The distance between them, that invisible gulf of ego and fear, felt smaller than ever. In its place was something wordless, something shared. For the first time, Morty didn't feel like a sidekick. He felt like a co-pilot. Time passed strangely after that. Not in minutes or hours, more like heartbeats. The last star flickered weaker now, its light bending softly through the ship's viewport. It cast long, trembling shadows that stretched across Rick's face, painting his wrinkles in moonlight. He looked older, yes, but also freer, as if the man who once fought against every law of the universe had finally stopped resisting. Morty spoke, almost afraid to break the spell. "Hey, Rick," If the universe is ending, does that mean we end too? Rick tilted his head, thoughtful.
Nah, energy doesn't end, Morty. It just...
Changes form. Maybe we stop being us and start being something quieter. A thought, a breeze, maybe even that star's last laugh. Morty's eyebrows furrowed.
That sounds kind of nice. Rick smirked again, eyes soft. Don't tell anyone I said that. Gotta protect the brand. Morty chuckled, shaking his head.
Classic Rick. The sound of their laughter echoed in the cabin, faint, fragile, but real. It filled the silence like the tiniest light filling a vast cave. Outside, the star pulsed one last time, and then, slowly, gracefully, it went out. Darkness settled over everything, but it wasn't empty. The dark was warm, deep, infinite. It wasn't death. It was rest. Rick leaned back, hands folded on his chest, eyes half closed. Well, that's that, Morty. Curtain call. Morty turned to him, voice trembling between fear and wonder. So this is really the end? Rick thought about it. Then he smiled. Not the sharp kind, but the tired, honest kind that comes after understanding too much. Nah, he said softly. It's just the punchline we've been building toward. Morty waited.
And what's the punchline?
Rick closed his eyes fully now. The joke was never about chaos or science or running from things. It was about this. He gestured lazily to the silence around them. The quiet after the laughter. The stillness that proves we were here. Morty swallowed, blinking fast.
That's
kind of beautiful, Rick. Rick chuckled faintly. Don't ruin it, kid. Just let it sit. So Morty did. He leaned back, feeling the hum of the ship's fading systems. The air grew cooler, the lights dimmer, until all that remained was the faint rhythm of two breathing bodies and the invisible heartbeat of whatever came next. Eventually, Morty whispered, "You think anyone will remember us?" Rick's answer came through a soft exhale. Nah, but that's okay. We were the noise between silences.
That's enough. Morty smiled faintly. Yeah!
That's enough. He looked one last time at the place where the star had been. Even though it was gone, he could still feel it, like an echo in his chest, glowing without light. In that feeling, he realized something simple but perfect. Laughter doesn't disappear. It just turns into something else. The warmth that lingers after the smile fades, the comfort in knowing you shared something unrepeatable. He turned toward Rick. The old man was quiet now, breathing steady, eyes shut, but peaceful. Morty whispered, "Good night, Rick." The ship drifted on, swallowed by a darkness so gentle it could only be called sleep. And somewhere, deep beyond galaxies, deeper than memory, and the universe smiled. The last joke had been told, and for once, everyone understood it.